Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to take a little different format today. We're going to talk about a very famous hockey player who's going to be the subject of a book very soon. And we're also going to talk about something that I think is kind of dear to any sports fans' hearts, and that's Sports Hall of Fames. It's Tuesday afternoon, and this is the HockeyDebates.com podcast. Welcome, everyone, and let me introduce our guest today. We have Suzanne Primeau, who, as you can tell from her jacket, is a big Toronto Maple Leafs fan, but she has good reason for that because her grandfather was legendary Leafs center Joe Primeau, the linchpin in the famous Kid Line in the 1930s and a Lady Byng Trophy winner. And we're also joined by Mark Gravett from the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame. We're going to talk with Mark about, and Suzanne's also on the board of the Hall of Fame, so we're talking to both of them actually about, what it's like to kind of run a Hall of Fame and the challenges they face. And I think anyone who has a local Hall of Fame in their town can understand and relate. And of course, as always, I'm joined by my podcast partner, the Hall of Fame hockey writer, Kevin Allen. So we'll start right with you, Suzanne. How exciting is it, so long since your grandfather played, but here they are talking about him and the Kid Line in a book. It's got to be pretty up, I would think.
Yes, very excited about that. Todd Deneau is writing a book about the Kid Line with Primeau, Conacher, and Jackson. And I'm really excited about when that book will be released. He's done a lot of research. He's actually told me things about my great-great-great and great-great-great-grandparents that I didn't even know about. So it's exciting from an ancestral viewpoint, but it's also exciting to have it all condensed into something that I think is going to be a pretty awesome book, especially illustrating that era and that era of hockey player at, the early 1930s when Papa played and they won the Stanley Cup with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Different generation, different look, and how they really created the foundation for what we're watching, what we're able to watch when we can watch it.
They officially became the Leafs in the 26-27 season, but it really seems like the 30s was when the Leafs really came to the fore in the NHL. And you look at that, between 1932 and 1940, they were in the Stanley Cup final almost every season.
Well, that was when Conn Smythe paired Papa with Conacher and Jackson in that 1930, that 31 season, and Conn Smythe actually signed my grandfather to a private contract. So. When I think it was the Rangers wanted to keep him back, and he went. Conn Smythe said, "No, you can't have him." No, but we've got him signed. No, I signed him to a personal contract. So Papa came to be with the Leafs, and that was when they were St. Pat's. And then I believe Conn Smythe changed the name. You could probably tell me more about that.
Suzanne,
yes,
I've talked to the grandchildren and the children of famous players in the past, and I'm always surprised that a lot of them say that either the father or the grandfather didn't talk a lot about their careers. And I wondered, did you have? Was your grandfather willing to talk about his career? Did you have a lot of great stories that you heard through the years, or did he not talk about it much?
And that is so true. It's amazing because we had a little. Reunion at Mike Wilson's place, the Ultimate Leaf Fan, and we had the Conachers, the Clancys, the Jacksons, Levinskys, the Primeaus there, and all of us when we went up to speak, and I think I got pegged as the first one to go up. I said, that's interesting because when we got together as a family, when we would have Christmases over at Ripplewood in the Kingsway at Papa and Nana's, we call my grandfather Papa, so I'll refer to him that way. All the grandchildren, there were 12 of us, we go play, run around. It wasn't like he sat us down in the corner and talked hockey stories. I did hear stories. It's not like it wasn't part of the fabric of our relationship, but it was really about family. And so true that many of us, I think, when we do talk together, children, grandchildren, it was about family when they were home, because that's where they were. They weren't on the road.
It's interesting, I've gotten to know Anthony Mantha playing for the Red Wings, and Anthony's grandfather is Andre Pronovo, who was part of those Montreal teams that won 5 cups in a row. And he tells stories about being a young boy and at his grandfather's, and his grandfather's friends would come over for lunch, and it would be Rocket Richard and Dickie Moore and John Beliveau, and he's just a little kid, so he didn't put two and two together really until he got a little older and realized, just how epic
Yes.
that he was having lunch with work.
Well, I do recall, Papa telling me things. We'd be sitting down in the main living room, and he'd say, "Oh yeah, like the times that because they would travel by train, right? It wasn't just the airplane it was going, and it was the original 6. So they'd be going. He'd say, you just couldn't fall asleep on that train because Clancy and Conacher, they were the jokers of the jokers. You'd wake up and your tie would be cut up to here. You'd be like having this short little tie that was cut right off. So there was a lot of those sort of talked about the pranks and the silly stuff that went on, and how my papa, being a real man of faith, he was, would go to church, and if they had to get on the train on a Sunday, they'd be running to catch the train, and the rest of them would be leaning out, yelling at them for being late to get on. But they were always teasing and joking, and I think they were all amazing friends, and I think that's what happens when people are on teams and travel like that, right? And they were a great bunch, and they all got along. It's really important.
Another thing that people maybe don't realize about your grandfather, and is perhaps overlooked in his bio, is that he was the only coach to coach the Stanley Cup, Allen Cup, and Memorial Cup champion, and with the Allen Cup no longer being the kind of force that it was in that era, he's probably never going to happen again.
Very true. You're right. He is. And something I was saying to you earlier is that it amazes me, because when I look at, people's careers now, of course, they move around, they were traded and all this, but Papa was true blue. He really was. I think he really did bleed the blue, because he played for St. Mike's. He coached St. Mike's. He played for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and then he coached the Toronto Maple Leafs, and then he scouted for them even after he left the organization, in terms of whether he was playing or coaching. It was the only team that he did that for, like any of the teams that came up, for the players that came up through the system. So it is amazing. The three cups. It's a big accomplishment. I think it's part of his legacy.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, Suzanne, his nickname obviously was Gentleman Joe, and I wondered if he ever talked about that, what he thought about that, if you know any stories about, how that nickname came to be.
I just knew him as Gentleman Joe, but I also knew him, and rightly so, as a gentleman, even as my papa. He was that on the ice and off the ice. It was illustrated always in family. Family was very important, but it was always like that in his relationships, whether it be with all of us as grandchildren or with Nana, Helen Primeau, his wife. He was always soft-spoken. He didn't jump in. He didn't boast. I remember, actually, I became very good friends with Jim Gregory, bless him. Amazing man. Papa and he were very good friends. And when Jim Gregory as GM and Johnny McCullen were coaching and GM of the team, Jimmy told me this himself. He said that, he loved your grandfather, your papa. Anytime you needed anything, you just had to make a phone call to him, and he said, Joe, you got to come over and talk to you. We're in trouble. It was during that era. They weren't doing so well. I said, we need to come over and get some advice. And Papa was involved with Primo Argo Block and Brick. He had left hockey to raise his family, 5 children, but also to build the business. And he'd drop everything. And Jim Gregory said the door would open up and say, come on in, whatever I'm doing, it will stop. I think that really illustrates how he was with friends, because he would consider Jim Gregory was a friend and a colleague. And recently as well, I was with Bobby Vaughn. I've gone to be able to visit with him, amazing man. And he said, when I was playing, and I missed being coached by your papa, but all the players ended up having to have a second job. And he was working at the Smythe Gravel Pit. And because my papa started Primo Block and Brick, Con Smythe had said to him, you know, Joe, you should come out to, is that Whitby area, Ajax, and you should buy the land beside, because then I can ship my gravel just right beside instead of shipping it all the way to Milton or to Cooksville. And you can do your blocks and you can have the autoclaves there. So my papa bought the land there, built that. And so there's a lot of hockey players that came there because they were employed by Smythe Gravel Pit. And Bob came up to me and said, you know, we didn't have agents back then. We had to negotiate our own contracts. But your papa made a point to come up to me and say to me how I should handle myself with the GM of that day, what to say, what not to say, and how to play the game so that I could get the contract that I needed. And he said, you know, I've always remembered that. He just came over to me out of his own accord. I think those are the sorts of things that speak to him off the ice with colleagues and friends, as well as on the ice, having won the Lady Byng, 1931. In fact, I've got it right here if you want me to show it to you.
Let's have a look at it.
It's really, really in rough shape. In fact, I can lift off the top like this.
Wow.
Yeah, it's 1931-32. If I get it up nice and close, to Joe Primeau, Lady Byng, presented by the Mayor of Toronto. In fact, Craig Campbell, the Hockey Hall of Fame, showed me the picture of my papa at center ice receiving this. It's really quite exciting, and to be able to hold it is awesome. Papa said that it got bashed up. He brought it home. My papa had 5 children with my nana, 4 boys and 1 girl. And they would just play with it. So it went to the jewelers more than sometimes I think that it was at the house. Then when the players would come over, you know, and my dad would have been a young boy, the players, Clancy, the rest of them, they'd all be roughhousing and do stuff with it. He said more times than enough it was in the jewelers than it was sitting in the home. So I do my best to try to keep it safe from being knocked over, because if it does, this is just going to come off.
Right on cue.
Right on cue.
So,
anyhow, that illustrates his on the ice, I think. And
Suzanne, have you ever, and maybe this question is for Mark and even Bob as well, has anyone ever, you know, come up with a good comparison for a modern day player that you know, your grandfather played like? You know, I don't know how anybody would compare him, but you know, maybe some people were alive long enough to make a comparison.
that's true. I know that, you know, having been not born when Papa played. However, I do remember being in a sort of an anthropology class when I was in high school and a history class, and all of a sudden the film came on, and then there was a clip, and we're all sitting there. It goes, and Primeau comes down the ice, he's carrying the puck, and he passes it over to Conacher, and I'm like, what? It was unbelievable to see him skate. I was like, wow, you know, because back in the day it was radio and Foster Hewitt, and so being able to see that film footage is amazing. And the way he maneuvered, his skating was beautiful. My dad's was beautiful too. And you know, I really admired Keon because I went to the games a lot and we went to a lot of games. And Keon, when he was at his height, I was like 14, 15. And I used to kind of think Papa was a little bit like that. That was just me. But that was just me, you know. I had this real fascination with Keon. And then when I saw Papa, and I've seen some other footage through Paul Patsku, who's given me some pretty awesome stuff to be able to sit back and watch. And it's pretty great. But I don't know, Bob, maybe you've got some ideas on that.
I was going to suggest Keon. I've always thought, you know, when the Leafs are on top, they always seem to have that, you know, that kind of quiet leader that kind of showed the way. And Joe Primeau in the 30s, and then you think of, you know, Still Apps followed him, and then Peter Kennedy, and then you even think of George Armstrong in the 50s and 60s. Guys that, you know, maybe weren't the first person you thought of on the team, but certainly were the guy that, you know, you talk to the guys from those Leaf teams that won the 4 Cups in the 60s, and Armstrong was the glue that kept that team together.
Well, that's quite interesting because I happen to have with me right here, and I don't know what made me bring this downstairs, but again, number 10, and my grandfather was number 10. And this is George Armstrong signed, and I don't know if you can see that. He scribbled it. I happened to be in Ken Dryden's office one day, and I had this with me, and I had said, would be really great. I know that George and Papa got along really well. George had a lot of respect for him. And I said, love it if he signed it. And Ken said, you know, George doesn't sign anything. He just doesn't do that. And I go, okay. And he goes, but I bet you he'll sign it for you. And I said, oh, why? He goes, George, your grandfather, everyone. And he happened to come in around the corner from Marty Walker's office. And he stood there and we were introduced. And I said, I'm going to ask you this. And he said, where's the pen? And he signed it. And then many other things, places, and he just won't sign anything. So I do cherish that very much. So it's interesting you should mention George in the same sentence as Papa.
So Mark, when you talk about, you know, those types of players, those are certain Hall of Fame type players, and why don't you tell us a little bit about the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame and kind of as with many sports Hall of Fames, you know, you're trying to find a home.
Yes. The Ontario Hall of Fame has been in existence for 27 years. At one time, it was located in a bricks and mortar structure at the CNE grounds in Toronto. And when the Hockey Hall of Fame moved, the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame basically ceased to exist in a venue. Today, it's evolved with a much more expanded board. And what's interesting, I think, is a true opportunity for the board members of the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame and how we represent that province is we have a chance to represent approximately two different across the world. So typically just hockey, the baseball. We now have representation from over 32 sports, and we have an opportunity to support 62 that are recognized in the province of Ontario. So the whole evolution of that is very exciting. And I think over the years, as Canada has become more successful in both the summer and the Olympic Games, or Winter Games, I should say, as well as other athletic competitions, just simply by population, the majority of the athletes tend to come from Ontario. And there's been a lot of tremendous stories that we can share for learning experiences, to the citizens of the province. So we're on a run right now to find a new home, and we're currently getting closer and closer to making that a reality. And from then, we will have something quite engaging to invite the folks of Ontario to visit.
Yes.
I know you've got a couple of events coming up that are obviously designed to help fundraise to make that happen. Why don't you tell us about them?
Well, in the year of COVID, it's been tough for all heritage or sports organizations. And we had to take the decision, similar to other provincial sports Hall of Fames, to reschedule our annual induction ceremony and awards gala from last October, actually this October in 2020, to October 13th in 2021. Having done that, partly the reason behind it was a lot of sponsorship that typically flows from various corporations or what our hardworking board members like Suzanne are able to go out and capture. That basically came to a standstill. A lot of organizations simply said we're in a holding pattern. So what we've done is we've relaunched our efforts for our celebration gala next October in 2021 at the John Bassett Theatre in Toronto. And in addition to that, we are going to have our inaugural golf tournament at the Beauvais Golf Club. And that happens, I believe, on June 16th. So keeping in mind with the changes with COVID, the vaccination that's being distributed, and keeping our fingers crossed, and a lot of common sense and intelligence that we are receiving from the health community and the government, we truly believe that we should be able to launch both events quite successfully.
Well, where can people go, Mark, to on the web to get more information about the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame?
The best way is simply to go onto the website and type in oshof.ca. Just the initials of the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame, oshof.ca. And that will bring you to the homepage, and that information will be shared with you. Everything from dates to prices, opportunities, and things like that, and how you can become much more engaged.
All right. Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today. It's always great for Kevin and I to talk hockey history. We both love the old days of the games. I know I was lucky enough once to meet up with King Clancy at Maple Leaf Gardens when I was a college student, and he took me on a tour of the gardens, and that was something that life-altering experience, I would call it. So hopefully we get that home for the Ontario Sports Hall of Fame, and we can all come visit.
That's great.
Well,
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Suzanne.
Oh yeah.
What's that?
This was when Papa won the Stanley Cup as the coach, 1951, and it was given to him by the NHL. And I don't know if can you see his name on that? Is it too tiny?
Yep.
Stanley Cup embossed on top, and inside, magically, what is produced is my Papa's hockey. With his stats saying he was the first ever signed Toronto Maple Leaf, and all about him, and he's sitting beside another great, Johnny Bauer. Yeah. I happen to have him inside, so they get to play hockey together inside this box right here.
I love that. That's awesome.
And another fun story about him, which I really just have to tell you because nobody would really know about this, is that with Papa, he was born in Lindsay, Ontario, and around 6 years old, his dad and family moved out to Vancouver Island. They sold a butcher shop, and he went out to start something different. But then before he was, just around when he was 11, they moved back to Toronto near the Humber River. And that's when my Papa first started to skate. 11 years old, his uncle, Cecil, who went off to the war and died in the First World War, actually, gave him a pair of skates, but they were way too big. So, problem solved. He put in woolen slippers inside to pad it, and went out every night, all weekends, every night after school, came in, skates on. I'm sure many of us have done that when you've got your own rinks, right? With your skates on underneath the dining room table. And his mom and the family would eat dinner, and he'd go right back out there. Out there, skate before he had to come in to do homework. And that's how he learned to skate. He played with other players that had already been playing and just jumped in and got in there. So I think that it's never too late to put the skates on.
All right. Well,
great story.
Again, I appreciate you both joining us. It was wonderful to travel down memory lane, and best of luck with getting the Hall of Fame rolling. And everybody have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you so much. And thank you for
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. I almost, the kind of the romance of the game, Suzanne tells that story about her grandfather learning to skate. I remember the Gordie Howe story about, getting a pair of skates during the Depression, and each of him and his sister each having one, and then he finally managed to wrangle the other skate off of her. And today, youth hockey is so regimented and structured and everything, it's just, I think we've lost that romance. You're not going to hear those stories about, skating on the pond or.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. We've lost that. Yeah, I agree with you. I loved hearing, her, she really obviously cherished the Lady Byng trophy and what he was given, and went for winning the Stanley Cup. And, I'm sure the family cherishes all the mementos. It reminded me of Gordie telling me that one time his sister was talking to him about, whether he wanted this flower pot back from his late mother's house. And he said something to the effect, well, why do I want a flower pot? Why, like what? And she says, well, because it's engraved, it was given to you. I guess the league gave away some flower pots when they won the Stanley Cup. And the sheepish Gordie said, yeah, I do want it, because it was from the 1950s. But And that's back when, those kind of things, those were the gifts. And now the families today, I think, treasure those, those type of gifts. But I agree with you about the, players that came up in the 60s. They still had all those stories of skating out from daylight to dusk, and playing out in the farmlands and the ponds and so forth. And now we don't we even hear that. I remember covering the Winter Classic, and you expect to go to any Canadian and saying, what was it like playing on the pond? But today they don't have those stories anymore. It's all. I agree with you. It's all about travel, hockey, and getting good competition and being gone for 4 days, and long high mileage automobiles are the symbol of today's Canadian player.
Yeah, and I can remember even being in high school, and there was an outdoor rink in our neighborhood, and you could rent it for $12 an hour. All my buddies would kick in, and we'd get the ice like on a Friday night for like 4 hours straight, and just go. It would cost us each maybe $5 or $6, and we'd play hockey for 4 hours.
Yeah, I remember playing pickup hockey, renting the local rink, indoor rink, and it was, real reasonable if you got to 12 or 14 people. Everybody just kicked in a few bucks, and you could play for 90 minutes or so. Getting it late on a Friday night, where we don't. The one thing that's different between American rinks and Canadian rinks back when I was growing up is in Canada there was no ice time ever. They were always in use, but you could find some ice time in American rinks in the 70s if you were willing to play after 11. So
one of my most bizarre pickup hockey stories I ever came across in my career, when I was covering the Detroit Tigers. I was in the Oakland A's clubhouse, and just walking over to talk to somebody, and Bob Welch, the A's pitcher, the Cy Young Award-winning pitcher, grabbed me by the arm, and he noticed my tag that said Windsor, and he said, "Amherstburg Arena still there?" I looked at him, and I said, "Yeah." He said, "Why?" And I said, I asked him why, and he said, "Oh, when I was in high school, my buddies and I would rent the ice at like midnight on Saturday night and go over. He grew up in Detroit."
Yeah, Hazel Park, yeah.
Yeah, he said we'd go over there, and I said, "Well, why would you come over there?" He said, "It was the cheapest ice time we could find."
Yeah, well, I covered Bob in college when he was pitching for Eastern Michigan University, and he was a typical Michigan kid. He liked hockey, he liked all sports, and all that. So I'm not surprised at that story, but I love that. That was a big thing too. The hockey belt in the 70s, in the United States was Michigan, Minnesota, and then Massachusetts area. Yeah, that was it. That was the hockey belt. Now of course it's California, and we're taking players out of Texas, and it's a little bit different now. But a lot of the American players who came up, from the Michigan, Minnesota, Massachusetts area connection, the New England area, they had outdoor hockey as well. I mean, I live in Michigan. We have a lot of lakes, and a lot of outdoor rinks. My hometown of Wayne, Michigan, you could play down near the rec center. They would freeze the tennis courts, so you could play as well. We had a lot of options. But yeah, I love getting relatives of older players, and I love the Dave Keon Primeau connection too. I just had never thought about that. The other thing that I think really comes up when you discuss Primeau is how we've sort of lost the idea of lines, like the romance of the line that always played together. That lasted a long time, but we don't see it as much anymore. Like, the Boston line with Pasternak and Bergeron and Marchand, that's a pretty established line, but there aren't that many. Like even in Edmonton, is Draisaitl going to play with Connor McDavid or not? It's not a given.
The only other one that probably comes to mind is McKinnon, Rantanen, and Landeskog.
Yeah, that's the one I was going to bring up as well. But and there are others, but none of them are. You remember it was like there was the nicknames that they had for all the lines, and it was just a lot more. fun. And, when I was, and not so long ago, even in the 80s, when you had Gillies and Bossy and Trache, and, there was, probably a handful of lines that everybody knew, pretty well. And, in Detroit, we grew up because we had two versions of the production line. We had Lindsay and Abel and Howe, and then we had Mahavlich and DeVecchio and Howe. Production 2, the sequel. That's not what they called it, but that's what it was. So
I've always thought it was cool that anytime a team gets a line with 3 young guys on it, they call it the Kid Line, and it kind of brings back the memories of the original Kid Line and kind of keeps them,
Yeah, I mean, as covering the league for as long as I did, my version of the Kid Line was in Edmonton in 1990 when Graves and Jelena and
Joe Murphy.
Who was the third on that?
Joe Murphy, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was Joe Murphy. Yeah, Joe Murphy for sure. Boy, and it was from that line that I developed my thought. I talk about it all the time. I've never understood this idea of getting, journeyman players or guys who are not very skilled and giving them 8 minutes. I've always felt that a team would be better served if they brought up their 3 best minor league offensive players and made that the 4th line. And, and my thought is that a lot of teams are still putting out guys who are not all that skilled. They're just, they go around and bang people. So if you threw out a skilled line out there, they wouldn't be playing obviously against, first line players, because that's probably what's holding them back. They don't have the skill to compete with the superior players, but they're pretty skilled. And, that's what ended up with that Kid Line. That Kid Line, those were skilled players. They were young, they were inexperienced, but they were the lower line, and they'd go out and they could create things, and a lot of things happened, and it was a really good thing. So
that's kind of what Pittsburgh did when they won the Cup in '92, and they had all those injuries, and they brought that entire lineup, their big lineup from their
Pilek and Collender and
Needham was the third.
Yeah,
and those guys scored a few goals.
I see. To me, it's a strategy that I would try. Just to see what would happen, I think it would work.
Well, we've run out of time as usual. We've got more hockey talk than we have time to talk about hockey, and we'll bid you adieu for today. But are we coming back Thursday with another show, Kevin?
I believe we are. Yes, indeed.
All right. We'll see you Thursday, and then we'll probably take a break for the holidays. But this has been the Hockey Debates podcast. I'm Bob. He's Kevin, and we'll see you on Thursday.